Okay, let's see if this works. I'm going live directly from YouTube now. This is the first time, not the first time we're streaming, but the first time we're using this new going live from the webcam option. So let's see. Hello, Sukhoi. Oh, that's a good start. We've got a Sukhoi in the chat. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? I do hope that works. Nice. Sound is perfect. You can hear me. Fantastic. Then we can get this show on the road. How is everybody doing on this Saturday evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time it is over there? Whereabouts are you all from? Right, I'm gonna have to see if I can now find the link. How does YouTube do this? Where do I find the link to my own stream? You'd think it's intuitive. It probably is. I'm just not very clever. There we go. I think I've got the link now. I think I've got the link. Oh, Bernhard must be here. Very quick to react. Once again, Bernhard, welcome. How are you? Oh, wow. The chat is really exploding. I will be right there with you all. I didn't expect so many people be streaming in immediately. Right. Let me just send out a message to all the people on my Discord that we're live. There we go. We are live. That is done. Right. I'm going to start somewhere in the middle. From Thailand. Hello. South Africa as well. USA, Italy, Canada. Fantastic. Northern Ireland, England, Sweden, Finland, USA once again, Greece. Fantastic. Texas. Nice. How are you all in Texas? Ireland once. Oh no, that was Ireland. Yeah, Scotland, Netherlands, Texas. I've got a lot of people from Texas here. Nice. California, New York, cool. Southeast Virginia, USA, Oklahoma, cool. Yes, I do have a Discord. Currently, it is for Patreons and channel members. It's a nice, awesome community that likes to talk about planes, technology, current events, and current aviation events, and good old life in general as well. Turkey, nice. Russia, cool. Finland again. Estonia, yeah, of course, Estonian shark. Of course, you are from Estonia, right? I think we did see some. Well, you call them Dutchies. I will call them diplomatically Dutch people. California, bonjour. I would assume France, perhaps Belgium, Wallonia, maybe Switzerland. Who knows? Austria, yeah. Bernhard, you are from Austria. That's true. Nice. Cool. Sweden. Okay, so fantastic, guys. Welcome indeed. I hope all of you are having a good Saturday. Let's get the show on the road. So what I was thinking of doing today is we're doing a little bit of a live Q&A session, right? We're going to talk about aircraft. We're going to talk about all the stuff that comes into our heads. Hopefully, I am going to be able to do this with my voice. You might hear me rasping a bit here. I had a lot of things going on yesterday. I had to run from one place to the other. And I did a lot of talking yesterday, uncharacteristically a lot of talking, and my voice is feeling it. But plenty of tea and plenty of honey has cured the worst of it. So I already have a lot of questions here from Patreons and channel members. I've asked them to sort of send me their queries a couple of weeks ago. Actually, not a couple of weeks ago, a week ago. And I think we're going to start with those. So if throughout this time you have questions as well, feel free to put them in the chat. However, I would maybe say don't do it just yet, because first I go through my Patreon questions and channel members, and then I'm going to pass on to the general chat questions, all right? So keep those questions for a little bit later. I will hopefully remember to alert you when the time comes. And if I don't remember, that doesn't really matter, because at some point I will be running out of questions and we will very organically be moving towards the chat questions. So, yeah, I already see a couple of questions there. Keep those. Nice. I'm seeing some good questions. Cool. Fantastic. Okay, so one of the questions I got, It was from Wienwe. Something I was thinking watching your Fairy Swordfish video. I assumed that World War II era torpedo bombers were not able to bring a torpedo back to the boat if they did not find a target. If not, was wastage created by this ever a problem? So, yes, for those who are, of course, Patreon and channel members, you already have early access to Inside the Cockpit, Fairy Swordfish, Sea Fury, and the Sea Vixen. So that's obviously the videos that he's referring to there. No, I mean, generally speaking, with torpedo bombers, they would actually try to do their best to bring the torpedo back, because generally speaking, there is enough ground clearance. It could be a little bit of a problem. It's correct to say that it's a problem, but generally enough, if you look at the Swordfish and the TBD, actually, I think you had enough ground clearance, especially with the TBD. But of course, there's also later on sort of this move away from externally mounted torpedoes to internally mounted torpedoes, right? I mean, we see that with the Avengers and in single engine aircraft. And then with the larger aircraft, typically enough, or usually you would actually mount the torpedoes either in the bomb bay if there was room, something like a G4M, or on the wings, and there's enough ground clearance. There are instances when you are required to drop your torpedo and essentially waste it. So I'm trying to think of an example, to be honest, where I do remember this happening, but I can assume that perhaps in some cases, because of range issues or because you're being attacked, that you drop it in order to try to get away or to extend your range, right? So if you remember, a couple of years ago, I made a video about the Lae Salamaua raid in New Guinea. I think that was February 1942, something like that. The torpedo bombers that were attacking, they had to go over the Owen Stanley Range, which is like this really treacherous sort of flying area in New Guinea. And they only barely made it over that hill, that mountain, really, or that mountain range. And if they wouldn't have found the ships in the Lae Salamaua area in sort of harbor there, I think they would have dropped the torpedoes regardless in order to get back over those mountains easier. But obviously they did find ships, but the Mark 13 torpedo didn't really work that well. Why? Torpedoes are exceptionally sort of complex technological marvels, let's call them. No, that's exaggerating, but they're more complex than typical bombs. The bombs, if you don't see your target, you might as well just drop the bombs. Who cares? You can get home back safe and sound faster. With a torpedo, you have a weapon that has its own propulsion system. It has its own steering depth and stabilization system. With the gyros installed inside, you don't throw that away unless you absolutely have to. And if you actually, to give you some figures here, I was looking at German aerial torpedoes not too long ago, and between the start of the war and sort of end 1941, the only sort of torpedo arsenal that the Germans have a month is an arsenal of roughly 100 torpedoes for all their planes. That's the F5B and that's the F5W. And the F5W is actually an Italian torpedo, which they got from the Italians because the Germans couldn't build a proper torpedo in the beginning of the war. You don't want to waste those things. So, you would try to get a torpedo back. That's long story short. Next question here. I'm just looking in the chat, everything. Okay, so that person is going. Good to see that YouTube's spam filter still doesn't work properly. Right, just gonna go through the channel to the chat. Hope all of you are having a good day. As I was saying, we are going to be doing some live Q&A sessions. First Patreon questions and channel members, and then general chat questions. So keep those questions safe and sound, and I will be getting to them very soon. I'm getting notifications left, right, and center. What is happening? Cool, fantastic. Thanks for the share, Bernhard. And yeah, Robert asks, were the B-18, so that's the Bolo bombers, right? B-18, 1-8, just aerial spotters, or would they have attacked with bombs or depth charges? And perhaps this is getting a little out of the way, but do you know how they set the depth, detonation depth for the airdrop depth charge? You can preset. You can preset that. They were not just aerial spotters. In fact, they were specifically equipped very early on in order to be hunting submarines. And it's really interesting, the story of the B-18 bombers, because the B-18 was out of date by the standards of World War I, even by 1939. It's definitely when the US enters it. Oh, thank you very much, Cliff the Lightning. Member for 9 months. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. By the way, I don't know if you're on the Discord channel. Sometimes I have a hard time with the names, but you can join if you're not on the Discord. You can join via the Discord integration on YouTube automatically. As far as I know, it's quite straightforward. So yes, B-18, right? So initially, they were equipped with MAD, that's magnetic anomaly detectors, right? And well, the technological part of it, this is a little bit hard to explain, but every sort of metallic object has its own magnetic field in a way, right? A submarine has its own magnetic field, an aircraft has its own magnetic field. And those detectors would be installed in order to detect the magnetic field of a submarine, even if it is underwater. There's different systems that provide different amounts of accuracy and different amounts of depth, but those work. And the B-18 bombers, they were installed with those, specifically the B-18B, by the way, because they had the B-18A, and that had to be retrofitted into the B-18B in order to install all this equipment, because the B-18A was too small to hold all this equipment. It just wasn't working. So if you go on Google, right, and you look for B-18 Bolo bomber, and then you type in MAD, M-A-D, or magnetic anomaly detector, you'll find some pictures. And look at the tail, and you will see this long sort of rod-like device coming out of the tail. It looks like somebody has turned a torpedo around and just shoved it into the tail of the of the Bolo bomber. That's literally what it looks like, right? And that started. I think that already started in the 40s, if I remember correctly. But in 1942, they were flying specifically patrols on the U.S. East Coast in order to try and find German U-boats. But I think the German U-boats eventually went further south. I should ask Drach on this. Maybe Bernhard knows it if he's still in the chat. Are you kidding me? Oh, YouTube, you are so good with your spam filter. Unbelievable. There we go, once again. But the thing is, this MAD system, its range was incredibly short initially. What was there? I mean, you had to fly over a submarine to find it, obviously, which minimizes your chance significantly. But what they did do, which is really cool, what the Americans did do, is they didn't use initially depth charges. They actually had this very small bomb. It's a 35 or 50-pound bomb. I want to say 35. Maybe it was no. It was 35. Yes, because it was a super small bomb, but it had a rocket booster on it, right? And you would imagine that if they drop those bombs, what is the rocket booster going to do? The rocket booster is going to propel the bomb away from the aircraft forward, right? But that's wrong. What it's actually doing, it is deaccelerating the bomb as fast as possible. So you hit the bombs away switch, and the rocket booster, the bomb detaches, and the rocket boosters ignites at the same time, which essentially causes the bomb to deaccelerate over a very short distance, and then fall vertically into the water, right? So imagine I need an aircraft. 1 second, I will bring an aircraft. Okay, just imagine that this Super Hornet is a B-18 Bolo bomber. It's not, but it drops its 35-pound bomb with that rocket-assisted motor, which I will now demonstrate with this fuel tank, this drop tank. And instead of obviously falling this way, or with a rocket boost this way, no, the rocket boost is deaccelerating it so that this happens, right? Roughly like this. Does that make sense? And that was essentially tried to do. And I think they had 2 salvos of those, and if you fire both salvos with a small interruption, with a small interval, you can spread an area of roughly 800 square meters, if I remember correctly, or 1,000 square meters. But it was a relatively large area considering that it's only 35-pound bombs, right? So that was pretty cool. That's pretty cool. But I think only about less than 100 aircraft had that conversion, and I don't think they sunk anything with it. I think that was more a little bit sort of well, it worked, but I don't think they ever had a moment where they put it into operational usage in the sense of, yes, we hit one of those pesky submarines. They also looked at what the RAF was doing. So the Brits were already thinking about using a sonar buoy. So they would drop it from the B-18 or from any other aircraft, and then that sonar buoy would listen for an aircraft. For a submarine, and obviously the aircraft would stay around the vicinity. Apparently that kind of worked for the RAF, but not really, and then they passed that research, as they did with so many things, to the US, and the US did make it work, but I don't think they used it in World War II. I think that was very much still limited at the time. But then we, of course, come to the big one, which is ASW or ASV sort of radar systems, right? Air-to-surface vessel radar systems. And this had the advantage over MAD, is that with MAD, you have to get lucky. Like if the submarine sees you coming from a long distance away and you haven't spotted it and it's underwater, you have to be so incredibly lucky to find that one exact spot where the submarine is in order to find it, right? With ASW or ASV radar systems, you can detect them from a long distance away. So again, based, I think, primarily on British systems, they had sort of long range, short range, and then also centimetric. I think that's the word. Did I pronounce that right? Centimetric? Yeah, I think I did. I always want to add another R, like centrimetric, but I think it's centrimetric. You will tell me, right? And the chat will tell me. They installed those, and I think the B-18 was the first aircraft to use a centimetric radar system for anti-submarine roles in the world, which is pretty cool, considering it was very outdated and it had to be converted from the A to the B model in order to actually carry that sort of equipment. What can I say beyond that? I mean, obviously used in anti-submarine warfare role. The US made their own sort of, I think, based on the British Mark II ASV system. The Americans made the SCR. It has to be an SCR 520. Let me check this. I want to say 521 or 512. Right, keywords. Yes, 521. And they use that. But the problem then is that later on, I think the U-boats sort of understood what was happening, and based on a radar system that the Germans had captured, they were able to actually find a countermeasure to this system. So even though this radar system was picking up U-boats from quite a long range, the U-boats themselves were then equipped with antennas that were sort of receiving the signal that the radar was sending out, and then that could be used as an early warning system against the incoming aircraft. So they would just, go underwater, and the aircraft would then pass in the vicinity of where they thought they had spotted, 50 miles away, a submarine, and they couldn't find it because the submarine already knew that they were coming. What is interesting then, I think the last sort of thing I'm going to say about the B-18 here is that the B-18 Bolo bomber started sort of the whole anti-submarine warfare research and development in the US. So there was a dedicated unit that was set up as well, and that's pretty cool. So for an outdated plane, that's really cool. So just going back into the chat now that I answered that questions, how are all of you? Let's check. 180 people here. Nice. Am I a fan of Warhammer 40K? Yeah, kind of. Cool. Oh, another very sort of diverse chat here. A lot of people still saying where they're from. Cool. London, awesome. So yeah, let's move on to the next question. What do we have? I've always wondered, this is from OD, I've always wondered if there was a reason for the early Japanese Navy Zeros being painted gray with black cowlings, or is that just really a stereotype? No, I mean, they were sort of gray-greenish, right? Although with the Zero, for a long time, people were saying they were white, and then they were gray, and then they were green, and there were some green Zeros, of course. That was the later ones, the land-based ones mainly. But yeah, no, they were sort of painted gray-green, like the actually I have one right here. That's sort of it's one I built myself even. That's sort of the well, it probably doesn't come over properly now let me just say, you see the webcam. Yeah, it doesn't really probably come over. But that's sort of the color that S0 did have initially during the war. I actually had a chat with Justin on this briefly. It would maybe be interesting to ask some historians that have done a lot of work on this, like, I don't know, Michael Clarenbold or something. So that color was already used in the Japanese Navy for a lot of aircraft. I think the A5Ms were using it. Some of the float planes were using it. So that's sort of a general standardized color. The land-based aircraft, so say the G4M that the Navy used, they obviously fluctuated with colors. Then they changed it depending on operational requirements and so on and so forth. As for, there was something else. Yes, black cowling. So that was a matte, anti-reflective matte color, black color, right? And I cannot I tell you based on, what I've read or from what I know, or sort of what I've asked other people that know about this, why exactly that color was chosen. There are some planes where this matte seems to appear to have been chosen to, say you're in a G4M, right? Or a G3M or something like that. And you're sitting in the cockpit and you have the engine to your left and the engine to your right. If you have anti-reflective matte painted on those engine cowlings, then it's less likely that you're going to be blinded as you're looking over, like if the sun is really hitting the aircraft. And that seems to be maybe one of the purposes, because some of those camo schemes that we have found on pictures and so on appear to have matte only, that matte black only painted on the inside, so towards the crew cabin. So that gives a little bit of an indication, right? As for on a fighter, yeah, maybe if he faces forward on the through the windscreen, that he could have let blinded by a more reflective surface. And it's also possible that it's for recognition. So if you have aircraft fighting it out in the sky, right? If you see a black engine cowling, okay, that's one of my own. We do know that certain colors like that were chosen in World War II in order to make quick recognition possible. Like the Germans used a lot of yellow initially, right? Later on, a little bit less so, because it turns out that if you put a very dominant color on your aircraft, then yes, everybody who is on your side will know not to shoot at you, but everybody who is not on your side will also immediately know that you're the one that should be shooting at. So it goes both ways. I hope that answers the question, right? Chat is going well, cool. Then we have Beer Minister. What was the difference between the normal land-based variants and the Ju-87C variant for the Graf Zeppelin? So that was Germany's carrier, right? In terms of frame structure and landing gear to withstand standing, starting, and landing in this new environment. They made some adjustments to the B model for this. However, only like 5 Cs were built. And none of them survived, as far as I know. No, they didn't. I mean, there's so few Stukas that survived anyway. There were some changes. So the wings were shortened. You had like 30 centimeters less wingspan on either side. So 60 centimeters in total, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was a foot a side. Yeah, that was it. And as I'm obviously now with Bernhard writing on a book on the Stuka, you can find a link in the description, I think. It must be like the first one or something. One of the things that I keep running into is books saying, well, the fuselage and the structure of the aircraft was reinforced to allow for catapult operations. It's like, yes, okay, sure. What exactly? Book doesn't tell me. None of the books I know tell me. And I have looked around in my primary sources. I have all the manuals, and I have a lot of files from the Luftwaffe from their testing as well. And I couldn't really specifically find anything. Yeah, but there were other changes. So there were on the gear. Yeah, you could blow off the gear in order to make ditching on water more convenient and way less dangerous than with a fixed gear. And that was then also later on then folded into sort of the additional Stukas that were rolling out from the factory lines from the D model onwards. Carrier operations, obviously, you want to be catapult. That you want to have a catapult launch option, so that those hooks and those spools were added. You had the landing hook, of course. You had a fuel dump, rapid fuel dump release, where you could just get rid of your fuel as fast as possible. Survival equipment, of course. Flotation devices. So the Stuka Ju-87C was supposed to have 4 flotation devices, which keep the aircraft up for a period of up to 48 hours, depending on sort of the seas. That was the intention. So yeah, that was what's going on. Wayne asks, how much better was the B-20? Oh yeah, there was another Bolo question. Yeah, I remember now. How much better was the B-23 Dragon than the B-18? It never seemed to get any time to do. It never seemed to get any time to do anything other than run cargo. No, it actually did some other things. Maybe not in the sense of actually contributing to the war effort, let's say, but in a direct manner. But it did do other things. So B-23, very quickly, B-23 Dragon was essentially designed to replace the B-18. But by the time that design came out, there were other companies like North American or Martin that were working on things like the B-25, or Martin was B-26, right? So the B-23 is comes out of the factory lines as a, sort of this ready-made prototype. Hey, we have an aircraft that can replace our good old B-18s. And then the Air Corps, the United States Army Air Corps, which was at the time still called Air Corps, just prior to World War II, looks at the thing and it's like, oh, well, this is interesting. Let's have sort of an evaluation done here in order to compare the B-18, sorry, not the B-18, the B-23, with potential other designs. And they have a competition, and they get submissions from Boeing Stearman, they get a submission from Martin, of course, North American, and then, of course, they have also the B-23 already ready sitting there. And they look at these designs, and funnily enough, out of those 4, there's only 2 that have already been built, right? It's the, what was supposed to be the Boeing Stearman, the A21, yeah, the XA21, and the B-23 are ready, and the B-25 and the B-26 are only existent on paper. Yet the Air Corps looks at these designs and they're like, oh, well, the B-26 looks like it's going to be absolutely marvelous. We are going to say that this is our prime candidate. The B-25 looks all right as well, so that's our number 2. And then we get to this B-23 thing that has already been built, but doesn't really appear to be that much better than anything we have here on paper. I think it scores not that significantly less than the B-25, but it does score less. And then the XA-21, forget about it. So the B-23, essentially, when it came down to it, had the only advantage it had is that it was available. They could have started building them. But the Air Corps, because they were not at war yet, and because it looked like they still had time, were probably just sitting there. It's like, okay, so we still have a couple of years here. Let's wait for the B-25. Let's wait for the B-26. And then those planes come out, and they made the right call on that one. The B-23 itself, of course, there were a couple of those were built, and they were used for, yes, they were used, they were supposed to be used in an anti-submarine warfare role to replace the B-18s or to strengthen that force of B-18s with newer design. But it turned out that just like the B-18A, the B-23 was actually designed not to have any of this anti-submarine warfare or anti-surface vessel warfare equipment. So they couldn't fit any of the radar systems, or they couldn't fit MAD. Yeah, they had already retrofitted the B-18A into the B in order to fit that stuff, and then now they were sitting on a B-23, and they were like, well, the same stuff again. Like, and they didn't do it. But what they did then do with the B-23s is they did a lot of testing using this as an airframe where they could install sort of some new equipment, smaller equipment. They did bombing trials with those aircraft as well, and so on and so forth. So it was not just used for cargo. And I think after the war, also for like in a civilian role, it was also used for testing. Okay, so fantastic. So let's go through the next couple of questions. Just going to go back into the chat just to greet all the newcomers. 250 people here. Fantastic. How are all of you? It is evening where I am. Where are you? Sweden? Sweden? Wow, nice, cool. Sweden joining. Fantastic. So just so you guys who have now joined, this is sort of a let's talk about aircraft sort of stream. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be answering a couple of questions that I collected starting a week ago from patrons and channel members. And then I'm going to go over to the general questions that we can find in the chat. Just so you know, that's what's going on. What is this stream supposed to be? Well, it's exactly that, Martin. Why didn't the USA use missiles on the F-86 Sabre? Well, because the missiles came in too late for the USA. Well, actually, no, they did use, testing, and then Taiwanese F-86s used them. They used the good old early air-to-air missiles that you can only fire off from a rear aspect, but that's what works. Okay, so Frankfurt, Montana. I love Montana. I've never been, but I love Montana ever since I seen The Hunt for Red October. South Africa, yes. California, London, Louisiana. Oh, somebody else from London. Nice. Denmark, Netherlands, Kansas, Aberdeen, Maryland. I was just thinking Aberdeen, Scotland. No, Aberdeen, Maryland, USA. Russia, cool. Georgia. Mordor, that's a bit far away, isn't it? Detroit, Alabama, Poland, Michigan, New York State, Ecuador, nice. Oh, you're missing lunch? Why don't you have lunch with us? USA, England, California. Military aviation history is more important than food. Well, to be honest, sometimes I work, like I go through archive files or I do some of my work and then I realize like 3 hours later, it's like, oh, I've missed lunch. Yeah, that's sort of my life sometimes. Ukraine, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Clifton, Mobile, Alabama, Hagen, Germany, Croatia, Oklahoma, Canada. Fantastic, cool. Finland, Alaska, that's very far away as well. How is it in Alaska? It is cold in Alaska. Don't tell me how it is in Alaska. As long as you're having a good day, I'm happy, but it will be cold over there, isn't it? Question, did World War II pilots really fly upside down when they... No. Armin, hello. Psy, how are you? Cool, so next question here. What were the initial steps taken to keep the crew alive during flight? I think this is referring to, this is referring to the Ju-87 again, the Stuka. And in case of a crash, did the plane see any changes in terms of survivability for the crew during the course of the war, armor plating equipment for the crew during flight, and if crashed? Yes, so on the Stuka, obviously armor plating was added, or strengthened rather. It actually started out with an armor plate already at the beginning of the war, but armor plating was added progressively, also, for example, to the rather exposed cooling system of the Stukas, and as you go through the models, that sort of ramped up the protection there. Then you would also get extra sort of armor kits that could be added as the aircraft was changing from its conventional sort of, nowadays you might say, air interdiction role, right, to more close air support work with the D model, specifically then also onwards D3, D5, and so on and so forth. But of course, you also had what the Germans called Tropenausrüstung, which is equipment used for in tropical circumstances. What essentially this means, like if a Stuka is being used, for example, in Africa, right? That's how tropical the Germans got during World War II, I guess. Then there's survival equipment installed inside the Stuka, and that's really cool actually. So in the R models, this standardized around quite a few cool things. So imagine you have a Stuka. Do I have a Stuka somewhere? I do not have a Stuka somewhere. But imagine you're sitting in a Stuka, right? You've got your instruments in front of you. You're just flying along, and you have your gunner / radio operator / friend / navigator in the back. If you look to your right wing, just about where the bend, sort of this inverted gull wing bend is, to the right-hand side, so the starboard side of that, of the gear, you will have 2 rucksacks that are packed full of survival equipment, so water, rations, shells, a tent, and so on. And on the left wing, you have the same thing, but instead of 2 rucksacks, you have 1 rucksack. And yes, there's 2 people, but you have 3 rucksacks. And next to that rucksack on your port wing, you will also have a small emergency radio beacon. Then behind the seat of the pilot, you will have the antenna for said radio beacon, and you will have a double-barreled shotgun. Yes, a double-barreled shotgun. This is not necessarily to fight off enemy soldiers. This was mainly to hunt, if you had to hunt, or to defend yourself from wildlife, if you had to do that. And I think the manual says, what shotgun is it? Does it? I assume. Do you guys want to know which exact shotgun it is? Please tell me in the chat. I can check what exact shotgun it is. You probably want to know, so I'm just going to start the search here. Where is it? Yes, it is a drilling. Yes, but there's 2 different. So there's like there's sort of a generic Kaliber 16 Schrot-Doppelflinte or something it's called, right? And then there's what is it called again? It has this weird designation that looks more American than it does German. Drilling M30, yes. Drilling M30, that's what it was. Yeah. Which is pretty cool. So yeah, look in the... Oh yeah, some people are already mentioning it in the chat. Fantastic. You guys know what's up. It is called the M30 Luftwaffe Drilling. Yeah, that's what it's called. How does that sound more American? Because it's M. Like I know so many things that have like M and like M1 Garand, right? M18, M4, okay, that's different time periods. I know. M1 Carbine, right? M8 Bazooka. That's why I say it sounds more American. Yes, I know that channel. It's a good channel. Get that question a lot for some reason. Okay, so next question here. Did the plane see any simplifications in terms of production until the end of the war? What were they and what impact had they? So Ju-87 production stops in mid-1944. I want to say September, but it's earlier than that because it's just phasing out. So there's a couple of models that are sort of still being constructed. But I think the real production one stops in May, if I remember correctly. Yes, of course, there were simplifications. There was a lot of cost cutting. I mean, look at the Jumor 211 engines. A lot of cost cutting there. A lot of cost cutting in production. Massive use of slave labor. I mean, we are talking about like 30 to 60% of the labor force that were building Stukas were slave laborers. So yeah, that all goes into the machine. And yeah. Next question here from Jens. Most underrated German plane in World War II, limited to models actually serving with Luftwaffe units. Oh, okay. So most underrated German plane in World War II, limited to models actually serving with Luftwaffe units. I love that latter part of the question, because otherwise, we will go off into Luftwaffe territory. So this is cool. My heart says in a way Henschel 123, but no. Considering how few of those aircraft were around, no. I would say the most underrated German plane of World War II. It's a very, I have two planes in mind. One is very famous. So one of them, the famous one, I would say, it's not necessarily underrated because a lot of people know about it and sort of appreciate it for its history, and that's the Ju-52, the transporter, right? But I do think it gets a really bad rep because the Germans sometimes use them in situations where they just lose a bunch of them. And yes, it is an older sort of transport plane. It really doesn't shape up to say something like the C-47. And they lose a lot above Crete. They lose a lot of them trying to resupply the last sort of resistance that the Germans, the Axis powers have in Africa, trying to come over from Sicily. So, but the Ju-52 is essentially the backbone of the Luftwaffe in terms of logistics and transportation, and they have a lot of bombers in that role as well. That, like, if you look at the transportation force, it's crazy. Like they use planes that they have conquered from the French, right, in transport roles. Sometimes just flying like 500 kilograms of equipment left, right, center. But the Ju-52, yes, it is a very famous plane, but I think it gets a bad rap in the sense that everybody sort of thinks, oh, it's outdated, it's old, but it's the backbone. And I think in that way it's underrated. The other plane that I think is underrated comes from Focke-Wulf. The Focke-Wulf FW-58 Vaya. Now, if that doesn't tell you anything, don't be surprised. You don't have to know this aircraft, but I would highly suggest that you look at it, because this is the trainer aircraft for the Germans when it comes to multi-engine planes. So they're essentially the whole bomber force of Germany, with some exceptions, of course. Any pilot that has to go through conversion training to a twin-engine or multi-engine aircraft goes via the Focke-Wulf 58 Vaya. And that is just hugely important. And I understand that people, they prefer to talk about aircraft that are on the front lines, that do the fighting. But without trainer aircraft, you will not have pilots sitting on the front lines. Without trainers, you will not have your precious aces, right? So I think that's quite an underrated plane. And I think trainer models or trainer aircraft are generally underrated in that regard. I mean, I only have to look at Inside the Cockpit, the series that all of you guys know. If I have a trainer aircraft there, the view is just nobody cares. But really, trainer aircraft are so fundamentally important in shaping and equipping a force with capable pilots that really deserve more love. So that's why my two votes here go to the Ju-52 and the FW-58. Now I'm going to check into the chat, and yep, we see the excellent video title. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthew. Yeah, so we are seeing a lot of suggestions here that are combat aircraft. See, I don't understand why the Dornier 335 is underrated. I don't understand. First of all, I didn't see any really combat during World War II, and everybody knows that it was super fast and this little thing, but it didn't do anything. The same thing with, I mean, the Heinkel 219, I saw that. Yeah, sure, but again, it's one of those celebrated German, oh, it has a radar, it's a night fighter, and so on. I don't know, my heart is more with the unsung heroes there, and the ones that are not necessarily all that well known. But that's just me. We all have our opinions, right? And we can all cherish them. Next question here comes from Kaiser. Österreichischer Kaiser, Out Kaiser. Ooh. I wonder if Bernhard's still in the chat. That's a fellow Austrian right there. Was there any chance for the Austrian Air Force to survive the initial German assault if Austria had decided to resist in March 1938? What kind of resistance could be the Austrian Air Force hope to achieve against the German forces in 1938? Danke. There was no chance. In 1938, there was no chance. For the Air Force. I don't know for the ground combat. I can only tell you from the Air Force perspective, the Austrian Air Force was exactly what you would expect from a country like Austria. This has to do with the fact that we are in 1938 and in 1939, we are in this transition period from the bi to the monoplane. And for many smaller nations, that transition was incredibly difficult because you have 30 years of industry experience and piloting experience and that went into biplanes. And suddenly these high performance monoplanes are coming out and they're expensive and not everybody's selling them. Yeah, the Germans don't necessarily want to sell the Bf 108, Bf 109. And if they do, it's super expensive. They make an offer to the Japanese on the Bf 109. It's incredibly prohibitive expensive, the offer that they made. It's unbelievable. And even the Japanese say, like, we can't do this. We're not even going to buy a single model because the Germans don't offer them the opportunity to buy a single model, right? Even though later on they do actually send over Bf 108s. Actually, I have a video on that, Japanese opinion on the Bf 108. Bf 109, why do I keep saying Bf 108? Also a fantastic aircraft. But yes, the Austrian Air Force, it is equipped with biplanes. It has less than 100 biplanes. They're all Italian. So CR-20s, CR-32s. They don't have CR-42s yet. I think that's sort of being debated, whether that's a possibility. But CR-42 actually comes in a little bit later. So that's not an option just yet. So that probably never happened then. And bombers, they barely have any bombers. They have 20 bombers, 30 bombers. And again, twin engine designs, right? All twin engine designs. So they have a couple of Focke-Wulf 58s, funnily enough. They have Focke-Wulf 58s. And then they have the Caprioni CA-133. That's not a twin plane. That's not a twin engine aircraft. That's a tri-motor. But you get the point, right? And they have two flight regiments, the Fliegerregiment Nummer 1 und 2, and those are based around Wien and Graz, and that's it. The Luftwaffe would have, there's no chance for the Austrian Air Force in that sense. Even in 1938, when a lot of German aircraft were not, or fighter aircraft were not necessarily the Bf 109, by the way. They were still flying some older machines as well. And they were also not the Bf 109s that everybody remembers sort of from the Battle of Britain. There were a lot of sort of D models sort of coming in, and the E model was only sort of slowly starting to appear. So, but even then. Okay, Alex wants to know, congratulations, it's 2022, and you've just been appointed to your country's Chief of Air Force. The Defense Ministry has ordered you to buy 50 new aircraft, but due to budget constraints, you're restricted to aircraft that served during the Second World War period. And what aircraft am I buying? Okay, so my country is Germany, so I am not going to do this with my country. But I would say that if you would take any country on the world on this, for most countries, don't buy a plane at this point. Because, well, what are you going to do, right? I mean, if you can buy 50 new aircraft, but due to budget constraints, I'm restricted to aircraft that served during the Second World War period, that implies that before that I had planes that were not of that period that are relatively modern, right? Can I not just have more of those? But no, jokes aside, I think certain countries nowadays, maybe a little bit controversial, but depending on what country you are, you don't necessarily have the budget or the need for a jet, like small nations, right? If you're doing coin, or if you're doing sort of anti-drug smuggling, or have small-scale border disputes with another nation that is similar size and purchasing power as you, a plane that is very simple but has some type of ordnance or some type of firepower can actually be a game changer. It's like the good old saying, if there's a big flashpoint, which let's hope there never is, but if there's a big flashpoint between any sort of major powers nowadays, be that what they may be, and you have a T-55 in the mix, that T-55 is not going to be doing much because it's such an old design. If you have a T-55, however, in a dispute between two very small nations in other parts of the world, and one side has a T-55 and the other one doesn't, that T-55, even though it's so old and antiquated, is a game changer. So I can see that theoretically any sort of country that currently uses something like the Super Tucano could, realistically speaking, also be using a a Corsair and a Focke-Wulf 190? I'm trying to answer the question within the spirit of the question, right? What you need is fuel autonomy, you will need loiter time, you need relatively good maintenance and logistical supply lines, which is going to be really difficult. But in the spirit of the question, let's roll with it. They're fast, they have flexible firepower, that you can have rockets, you can have bombs, you can have 50 cals and cannons, and yeah, that's it. Oh, I thought of a way to answer this question a little bit more seriously, perhaps, implying that I have relatively modern machines now, but due to budget constraints, I have to go back to World War II in order to buy new aircraft. I'm going to buy trainer aircraft. I'm going to buy something like the AT-6 Texan or the Booker 181. I'm going to buy those as basic trainers. And then I'm just going to wait until I have more money to buy something new. There we go. Problem solved. Didn't even need that monologue. Petros. You've been in the cockpits of numerous countries' aircrafts by now. Which country do you think did the best job in cockpit layout? And is this the case from pre-World War II to modern aircraft, or does it change? It changes all the time. So it's very difficult because, yes, I have been in sitting in quite a few cockpits, but I think as a pool of comparison, it is quite a small number still. But considering that I look at cockpits and that I've sat in quite a few number of them, this question is still difficult because cockpits standardize only with World War II, I think. I would argue that they're really only standardized with World War II. So what you have in front of you, your basic 6, what you have to the right, that's usually sort of your engine dials, what you have on the left, what you have on your sort of a left console with the throttle, and depending on the aircraft type, you have some of these oxygen systems there, you have some of the navigational systems there as well, although in some countries and in some aircraft, those come on the right-hand side. You have a lot of sort of the engine starter systems, and what else do you have on the right-hand side usually? Yeah, of course, the circuit breakers are usually there. Engines, some of the engine starter stuff also goes on the front left as well. So there is a certain logic to the whole thing, right? But every country does things very differently. And also, if you look at this, take World War II. Let's take the Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. The Bf 109 from the cockpit layout, you can still see it's in spirit late 1930s. If you look at the Focke-Wulf 190, which has one of the most intuitive and ergonomic cockpits there are during World War II, you can see that divide, that big change. And I would argue you see that with other countries as well. Although consistently, I would think that the Americans do very good cockpits, simply because the Americans think big. Everything is a little bit bigger, and there's always room. There's always room, and they do seem to think more about sort of the how the pilot feels in the cockpit. Like if you compare some of the American cockpits, even of the Century series fighters, and to what is for example, coming out in Britain during the same time. I mean, please just give me the American cockpit. Please give me the American cockpit. That being said, 1950s and 1960s is an extremely difficult period in order to actually design a proper cockpit. Look at the Hawker Hunter video and inside the cockpit on the Hawker Hunter to see what I mean. There's so many switches and dials. There's so many systems that have been put in there, and they haven't really figured out how to compartmentalize those things and automate some of the systems and move away sort of from the more analog way of handling things with a lot of switches, which we fall for. There's a certain time lag on there as well with Soviet aircraft, for example. The Soviets still have a lot of that as well in their newer aircraft, although I'm exaggerating. So MiG-29, sort of early generation MiG-29 still have that a lot, whereas in the West we sort of went away from that. But now the Russians also have their very sort of digitally laid out cockpits as well. What's another good example? Oh yeah, of course, the Sea-Vixen, Inside the Cockpit on the Sea-Vixen, out already for patrons and channel members, will be out on the channel eventually as well. If you see the Sea-Vixen Inside the Cockpit episode, watch that video. If you want to see a cockpit where the pilot just has a button and a switch overload. It is ridiculous how many switches and buttons are in there and how many things you have to do. Although, having gone through the manual, having set inside it and knowing what you actually have to do in order to start the engines on, it's actually not that bad, but it just feels overwhelming once you go inside there. So yeah, and a lot of this is going to be personal preference. And for pilots that are being trained on these platforms, whatever they're using is going to work because there's muscle memory, there's just repetition, there's automatisms that you get from just being always in the same aircraft. So just going back into the chat here a little bit, we're still on a couple of Patreon questions. We are getting near the end here, so I will open up the floor soon to everyone. I hope all of you are having a good time. 320 people right now. No, 360. We just lost 4 of you. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you're having all a fantastic evening or morning or afternoon. Nicholas, are there any subject matter experts that you follow on social media like Twitter that you would love to interview? And if so, who? A lot of people, and a lot of people also that aren't on Twitter or social media that I would love to interview. And I think we're going to do a lot more of that in the future as well, because I really want to get some of the experts that are out there and just bring them to the channel. And I think so many of them have so many good things to say. And, you know, every time I make an interview with them, I learn just about as much as you all do, unless you yourself have already studied that area. But even then, I think it's always good to hear somebody else's opinion. So we already have quite a few expert interviews on the channel. So we did the one on the drones, the one on FCAS, Russian, of course, Chinese fighters or Chinese aircraft. And then that's going to continue as well. But right now, I'm not going to say any names because I don't really feel like I want to be demanding it publicly from somebody. But there are a couple of people that I'm looking at. I'm just like, yeah, I really want to talk to you. I really want to talk to you. That would be so cool. So yeah. Just checking. Did I just get a notification? No, I didn't. Another question here. Looking back, what surprises you the most about your journey from a Wharf on a gaming channel into what it is now? So I actually started as a War Thunder history channel, to be precise. And then I went sort of more into the gaming aspect, and then I went into history, and then I went in sort of more history and doing personal research, going to archives and so on and so forth. Things. What surprises me the most about that journey? Oh, I'm bad with these questions. This is going to sound naive, and it is naive. One of the things that sort of surprises me is that I'm actually able to do this, that it's possible, technically speaking, for me to do this, right? Living in a day and age where anybody can make a YouTube channel and talk about their own passion. Like, we are living in unprecedented times when it comes to information transfer. So naive answer, but that would be at least one thing. And then beyond that, if you extend the logic from being able to transmit information, that there is also people then that are on the receiving end that appreciate it and that like it. That's really cool as well. Makes it all worthwhile. And in many ways, I think it's also, I make content now that I wish had been made before, right? So Inside the Cockpit is a series where I'm just like, I wanted this all my life. I wanted somebody to go through aircraft to aircraft to aircraft, in museum from museum to museum, and show me the ins and outs of an aircraft. And I mean, that person can't show me everything, but sort of a good, not just an executive summary where you're just like, oh yeah, this is the weapons, this is the guns, and this is the tail, but sort of going into the nitty gritty as well a little bit, and with some additional detail. And that's what I'm doing myself now with Inside the Cockpit. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's that transformation of, hey, why is there none of this sort of content to going to that content? I mean, and that all changed. I mean, and that all started, I think, obviously not with me. That I think that started with the chieftain doing that with tanks. I think that's where that idea started to fester in my brain. And when I started then transitioning to history content again, that's when I tried. And I tried with a lot of museums, and you have to get your foot in your door. And it was a long struggle, but now I'm starting to see the payoff in that sense, that I can get access to aircraft, that I can bring them all to you. And this is something that, I would have wanted myself. So it's awesome. And it's funny because it also shows that it took me this long time to actually realize that this is in many ways what I want to do. Yeah. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, chat? I hope that makes sense. Got very personal there for all of a sudden. Petri wants to know. There was Gefechtsverband in Finland. Was there any Luftwaffe detachment or unit that had a major impact during the last year of World War II in Europe? So that's May 1944 to May 1945. I mean, it depends what you define as major. Operationally, ME-262, no, because they didn't stop anything. So no, that would be maybe the easiest answer, but that's not a honest answer, because they didn't. Yes, they had tacticals. That's the thing with the Germans and the Luftwaffe at this time. They have tactical success sometimes, small scale tactical success, but operational success, no. Forget about strategic. We ain't talking about that anymore. Operationally, no. Tactically, sure. I mean, you could say that maybe the introduction of jet fighters is a strategic victory. But if you can't make operational and tactical gains out of it, or operational gains and then also concrete strategic gains out of it, then that's for nothing. So yeah. I mean, I'm thinking there's like missions where they try to blow up the Oder bridges to stop the Soviets. And they do hit some of the bridges, but they don't properly destroy them. And the ones that do hit, the Soviets just repair them in a couple of hours. So that's not really worth it. Tactical success, again, for a couple of hours, you could say. So no, there was nothing the Luftwaffe did at this time that that I would think had a major impact. But then again, what is major, right? Another question here. Does learning more about a plane and the history, context, and doctrine surrounding it change your opinions on it? Yes, absolutely. So writing now on the Stuka book, my opinion about the Stuka and sort of the role of the Stuka in the Luftwaffe has changed a lot. And also my opinion, and going from that, my opinion of sort of how the Luftwaffe conceptualized it, because I had to go into a lot more detail on that during my research, also changed a lot. But then there's, for example, other planes like when I did the Inside the Cockpit episode on the F-104 Starfighter. I did a lot of research on Starfighter, and my opinion changed a lot about that. And I still want to make a video about that as well, the Starfighter, and sort of its historical legacy and sort of the reputation it has, and so on and so forth. Doctrine. History, context, and doctrines surrounding a plane. What's always interesting is sort of this divide or this interaction, this feedback loop, you could say, between doctrine and technology, right? And how is doctrine reflective in the designs and vice versa? How is sort of technology that comes out being then reflected into doctrine? And judging that stuff is really difficult because you're running into a lot of sort of contextual issues, right? So obviously from somebody who comes from a NATO country, let's say NATO country, right? Or Western sort of thinking, if you look at planes that the Russians have or the Chinese have now, you might be saying, well, that's a disadvantage, or they don't do that well. But then if you flip it around and you contextualize their aircraft within the context it's being used, then suddenly things start making sense, right? And it's vice versa as well. If I don't know, if we saw people from Russia earlier in the chat, if you all just come over to sort of our point of view about how the West handles their aircraft, that probably seems very foreign as well and counterintuitive. But once you start thinking about the sort of system that is in place, it starts making sense again, right? Stahlfaust, was there ever much talk about Adolf Skarland big blow operation and how effective it would have been? Would it have had the same issues with the big wing strategy that the RAF had? Yeah, probably, but maybe it would have been a little bit more coordinated, but no less chaotic. I think the problem with the big blow is that it's sort of it's a little bit of an overstated thing. It's sort of a what if scenarios, and with what if scenarios, people sort of tend to gravitate towards them and always assume that a what if scenario is going to be automatically more successful or effective than what actually happened, right? So if only they would have done this, that would have meant that they would have, as a shortcut here, that they would have won, right? But that sort of what if scenario never seems to understand that in many cases there are reactive forces happening as well. So if you change your strategy or if you have something new, then the other force is not just going to be like, oh well, let's go home then. They're going to be reacting to that. They're going to be putting into place countermeasures. And with Garland as well, and the big blow operation, by the way, I mean Garland himself, he knew how to sell himself. And he knew how to speak, especially sort of to the British and American audience. He knew sort of what they wanted to hear, but at the same time, he knew how he could sell the Luftwaffe and his own legacy and the Luftwaffe's legacy, right? So the big blow in that sense, I think, is sort of a silver bullet in many ways, maybe. But yeah, he sells it sort of as this big bullet, right? And he even tries to sort of exonerate the Luftwaffe from its own failures and say like, oh, well, we could have done something if only the higher ups had led us. But if you have something like the big blow, well, what's going to happen? The RAF and the United States Army Air Force, the USAF, they're going to react to it as well. And I think after a very short period of shock, they would have reacted extremely aggressive against the Luftwaffe, even more aggressive than they would have done. That they already did. So, yeah, I don't think we could rightly assume that Germany would have been able to sustain their big blow ops for longer than the Allies couldn't make up for their own losses and implement countermeasures. So yeah. That's I think that answers it. So now I'm done with my Patreon and channel member questions, and we still have time for the chat as well. We only have one problem. My chat crashed, which is really annoying. Let's see if I can restore that. Test. This always seems to happen at around the 1 hour mark with YouTube, that the chat just crashes, which is really annoying, but there is a fix. I just have to watch my own stream now. How silly is that? If you have posted sort of a comment in the last, say, 20 minutes, there's a good chance I haven't seen it because YouTube just decides that after a certain amount of time, I'm not allowed to see the chat anymore. Let me visit my own chat. This is so silly. There we go. I'm watching my own stream now. 150 people, it says. Sorry, 350 people. How are you all doing? Oh, I have an ad as well. Cool. Okay, so I see my own chat now. And I'm going to have to do this in the smart way, I hope. There we go. Okay. So I hope I didn't miss anything. Miss anything important here. Cool. Right, so the floor is open. Let me know all your questions. I will try to go through as many as possible. Answers might be a little bit shorter. Oh, hello, Hound. Have you been here earlier already, or did you just join? Okay, the chat is a video on the Hellenic Air Force in World War II. Honestly, nothing planned right now because I'm very sort of ignorant on that, sadly. But if I find some cool sources, yeah, why not? That would be nice. I do like sort of telling those sort of stories as well. So that would be cool. How did the rivalry between Imperial Japanese Army and the Navy affect their air forces? Oh, where's Justin when I need him? How did the rivalry? I mean, they didn't like to cooperate. That's for all. They had their own sort of sections on the map where they would be operating. There was some sort of collaboration early on and sort of mid-war again, especially then, especially in the South Pacific. But the funny thing is, like, so in the South Pacific, right, the Navy goes in, and the Navy, with their carrier forces, they essentially do what you could term a drive-by on the Allied positions, the air, especially the sort of the air positions in sort of the New Guinea region. And they do this in order to support the initial landing operations by the Army. And then they're there and they're like, okay, so we're leaving now because we have our own operations. You know, the Army, you are going to be able to hold this position yourself, right, with your own aircraft. And the Army just sits there and says, like, no, we didn't plan to bring any of our aircraft here. You guys keep your aircraft here. So the Navy leaves zeros and like a bunch of their aircraft there, and it gets worse and worse and worse. End of 1942 and then 43, and they're just like, we cannot hold this position. Like, it's a drain on our pilots, a drain on our resources. We don't want to be in this theater. Like, this is the Army's position, right? And the Army is like, no. You guys are doing a good job. We're not bringing any fighters. You guys hold us. The Navy, and this is very simplified, and Navy essentially says at the end of the day, well, we're out of here. And they leave. And the Army then, of course, has to go into the South Pacific and say, okay, well, the planes just left us, so we have to bring our own planes. And they do that. And they build up their air force in the region, New Guinea region and so on, and they just get absolutely flattened in... Oh, I can't remember the date now. Is it late 1943? The operations at VWAC. Let me just check that if I get that right. I have a video about this, by the way, with Justin, so that might be something. Yeah, I think it's 1943. And then they lose their air force. The Army loses their air force in the region, and then they build it up again, making the same mistake as they did the first round. The Allies come in again, and with the bombings in sort of the Hollandia region, destroy the Air Force, the Army Air Force again. And both times, the Army Air Force loses like 100 to 150 aircraft in a region from like 300, so 50% just gone within 1 day of operation. So that tells you a little bit sort of about the interaction between the Japanese Naval Air Service and the Army. Let me scroll up here a little bit. Do you think that Germans would have won the Battle of Britain if the Me-262 was in mass production by that point? Well, it wasn't. And I'm not interested in what-if scenarios. It obviously wasn't. And if we were at a technological standpoint in 1940, where the Germans had a jet engine, then it's very likely that other countries, like Britain, would also have had a jet engine at this point, if that's the technological level that we're at that point. So again, it's there's always action and reaction. Right. Germany's early SAM development and how it would have affected Allied strategic bombing. I actually have a video on this as well. It's an older one, but it still checks out. And I mean, those rockets, yes, there were rockets and there were missiles, depending on how you want to refer to them, considering their capabilities. Considering how much ammo you have to push into your 88s and your 105s and then your 12.8s in order to bring down one single bomber, if you can just fire off a rocket, or a rudimentary missile that has some sort of guidance systems, either from the ground or that can, via something that is similar to like the VT fuse, right? That has sort of a sense of where the enemy aircraft is with a Doppler effect. Then of course you're going to achieve a lot better accuracy. But those systems are also going to be incredibly difficult to produce and expensive to produce and complex to produce. So ammunition for flak guns is cheap. And there are so many flak guns and there's so much just ammunition that you can just fire off. Even though, speaking about that, even though you could, like, for example, with an 88, right? An 88, and you have enemy aircraft coming in sort of at 6,000 meters. That's 18,000 feet. You can, theoretically speaking, on a bomber formation of 4-engine bombers, B-17s, B-24s, have a 12-minute long interval in which you can track and fire at that formation. And you could put a lot of rounds into the sky during 12 minutes. But the German flak crews were actually instructed to fire at a lower than possible fire rate in order to conserve ammo. From, I think I saw this even by 1942 or 1943, but I would have to check that in my files again. So yeah, there's a little bit food of thought. I don't know how much slower they were supposed to fire, by the way. I just know they were supposed to fire slower. That's what some of the files were saying. Was the ME-163 ever used in anything other than intercepting bombers? No, it was a point defense system. And it was useless, absolutely useless. Did Lend-Lease planes affect Soviet doctrines, or they just adopted planes they received and to how to fought with them the best they could? They actually tried to take the planes they got via Lend-Lease and applied sort of their own operational doctrinal thinking onto them, which makes sense. Like, what else would they do, right? So obviously the planes that they appreciated were the planes that could operate within the Soviet conception of how the Air Force is supposed to be running, the VVS back then. Whereas those that didn't do that, yeah. And there are certain planes that were more sort of sturdily constructed, like the A-20. They really liked the A-20. That also had to do with sort of the reliability of the machine, the tricycle landing gear, the stability in flight, the radio systems, and so on and so forth. They also liked the P-49. I don't have to tell you that. All of you know that. P-63 as well. But then there are certain aircraft where the West really liked them and the Soviets didn't. And that is mainly because in the Soviet sort of mindset, in the Soviet operational thinking, and what the Soviets actually needed, those planes didn't really have a role. The Ju-87 was not the only Stuka. Ju-88, Dornier 217. Yes, so Stuka is just Sturzkampfbomber. It's just an abbreviation. Commonly referred to the Ju-87. We actually make a point about this in our book, Bernhard and I. We say, I think somewhere in the introduction, look, we're actually not using the word Stuka that much. Ironic for a book that is literally called Stuka, because it is such a generic term. And I think I also say that in the Inside the Cockpit episode, right? But the question now goes to, was the Heinkel 177 also planned as a dive bomber? Not planned, but refitted into that. So initially it was just supposed to be a bomber, and then they were like, oh yeah, we would like also have this massive machine with 4 engines doing dive bombing. I mean, 4 engines, by the way. Yes, it looks like it has 2 engines and it has 4 engines. I second Razgrid's questions and any good recommendations on... Okay, I need to find Razgrid's question now. What are some of your favorite books to read about military aviation history? Do you have any strong recommendations covering battles, machines, or strategy? So, what do you all want to know? Yes, I do. So, I'm only going to go with English books because I assume that's going to be the most helpful to everyone. Yeah. So I have a lot of books that were in German, but that's only useful for a handful of you. Where to start? So have you seen the last video coming out that came out on Thursday on the injection engines? Yeah. So if you're really into engines, I would say inner capitalist now switching on. Yeah. I'm told by a lot of people also in the community that I have to be a little bit more upfront about my own personal branding and products. I have a book that is currently being published. You can find it in the description below. It's called Stuka Book on the Ju-87. That's the book that I would recommend. Now, going over there, capitalist off. 4 engines. 4 engines get this one. Callum E. Douglas, The Secret Horsepower Race, right? Fantastic book. Fantastic book. Yes, absolutely. Tammy Davis Biddle, Rhetoric and Reality in Air Warfare. Get this book. It destroys a lot of things that are still being said in documentaries to this very day, and this will give you a much well-rounded and a much more accurate sense of especially what sort of strategic bombing and bombing in general and sort of how we conceptualize the air war in World War II nowadays and what it was really like. This book will fix that. All of these books are good. Yes. If you're sort of into SAC, Strategic Air Command, so big bombers supposed to bring nuclear weapons, and defend the US. Get Brent Tsiarnik, I hope I said that correctly, To Rule the Skies, as well as Winning Armageddon from Trevor Albertson. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. The Mediterranean Air War by Ehlers. Yes. Arming the Luftwaffe by Usil. Yes. Red Phoenix Rising. The reason why I say this book is because I want to give you all something that is on the Soviets. This is sort of I would say, the best that's available in the English language. There's also this one. Soviet Air Force Theory, James Sturrett. And if you want to have like something on the RAF, perhaps there is a good series by Philpott. It's called The Royal Air Force, Volume 1 and Volume 2. That's pretty good. Oh. Okay, so this is one of the best books ever written about the Spitfire. Yeah. I mean, the amount of stuff in this book. Like, if you have any sort of regard for the Spitfire, you need to get this one. My chat crashed again. Fantastic. Anaphylactic. When will there finally be a video with Drachenifo? You two sound like a good mix, at least a similar sense of humor. Thanks very much for the donation, by the way. Yes. Yes, so we have inside the cockpit episodes, he sort of makes some cameos in there in the upcoming ones. And he will make also an appearance in an upcoming video that's probably still going to be released for us. Yes, so remember my book, and Bernhard has been pointing out this. This is the book that we're publishing at the moment, right? This is very early test print. Everything work in progress, right? But this cover is going to be relatively close to the final one. So this was pre-campaign. Yeah, this is what we showed you all when we were starting to finance it, and that's sort of the thickness of the book. And then you, all of you handsome devils, blew us out of the water with the stretch goals. Yeah, so this is just a test print of the content, so it doesn't have the cover, but this is now the book. Yeah, so that's what it appears like 40% more, but I know there's actually going to be even more than that. So it's at least 50% more. Sorry, not 50%. It's double. Thank you so much. Seriously. It's awesome. Yes, it's missing the glossary. That's right. Bernhard and I have been working on the glossary recently. And how many pages is it by now? Oh, how many pages is it now? How much would I have to donate for you to read your book to me every night so I can fall asleep to the sweet dreams of Blitzkrieg? Oh, Bo, get out of here. Get out of here. How are you? How are you? How is Texas treating you? I hope you're well. I hope you are well. 40 with bibliography. Nice. How do I ask Bismarck a question? Well, you can just put it in the chat and hopefully I will see it. Hi to you indeed, Bo. We should play again soon. I know it's my fault. We will fly again, hopefully. Let's do that before December, because I'm heading off to Germany in December. I have a question. If Germany sent her Luftwaffe to the Mediterranean and conquered Malta and then support the Italian fleet and attacked the British fleet and produced more naval bombers, what would that change? How much time do you have and how much research do you have to do before this? No, I joke. There is actually a very interesting project that Drachiniffel, Bernhard, and I embarked on a couple of years ago. I think it was Tankfest 2019. This is certainly it's 18 or 19. Bernhard will remember. And we had a 1 hour and a 1 hour and a half or 2 hour discussion on what would probably have happened if the Germans had switched all their resources after the conquest of France into the Mediterranean, and what would have happened. And Drach obviously did the naval aspect, Bernhard did the strategic and the general German aspect, and I did the naval the air aspect. Watch that video. We did a lot of research for that, by the way, and that will really show you. The more you go into the depth of it, the more all these what-if scenarios sort of fade away and become steam and smoke, and you really realize how difficult it is. Bernhard, can you send me the link on Discord, please? I will put it in the chat. I guess it doesn't work for you, right? I have a lot of air models. Yes. What is my favorite? I do like the F-18, honestly. I like the CL-18. The Canadair Sabre. I like that one as well in Luftwaffe, West German Luftwaffe colors. I like the Tomcat. The Mirage is pretty awesome. The MiG-29. Yeah, I like all of them. That's why they're standing there. So the video I was talking about earlier. By the way, please forgive my face and my completely disinterested sort of look at the end of that video. I actually was suffering from a heat stroke when we recorded this, and it wasn't obvious until the day afterwards. So I am sort of out of it from halfway off the video. I'm just like sitting there like that. That's the video there, right there. Notorious spammer MHV blocked from posting YouTube links. You should see his message history with me on Discord. And I would give spammers a run for their money. German now leaves bunker for the first time. It can happen. Yeah, it can happen. But who would have thought that the English sun, renowned for its strength and intensity when it doesn't rain, would give me a heat stroke? Well, it's a suspected heat stroke. I never got diagnosed because, like an idiot, I don't go to the doctor, right? But I felt horrible, and I can only assume that it was a heat stroke. There's only one sun. What is your favorite World War II airplane? Well, for this stream, like I said, it's the Focke-Wulf 58. Do you wish there was still one airworthy CASA 111? I mean, yes, I definitely want sort of one flying example of every aircraft that was out there to be around. But at the same time, I know sort of what time and effort and the sort of money it goes to just have one of those running. And then the risk it has as well, if it crashes, some of those crash and burn and they're completely lost forever. So I'm happy there are still some CASAs out there that we can see and appreciate. I think that's my main sort of attitude towards planes in general, because there's so many planes that have such a fantastic and fascinating history that are no longer represented in museums because they simply do not longer exist. Like, they were scrapped and not a single one was kept. So that's my first priority. What is the most bizarre and strange aircraft in World War II in your opinion? I mean, I'm not a fan of the Natter, the thing that's supposed to shoot rockets at aircraft. I mean, and then there's like it deploys a parachute, pulls out the pilot at the same time, and then floats down together with the fuselage next to it with a parachute, and then goes into a new one, flies up, shoots his rocket, the aircraft blows apart, and he has to rinse and repeat all that process. I mean, what an absolutely idiotic idea that is. Could you imagine yourself going into an aircraft, right? You're shot up there at the speed of sound. All you have on board of your aircraft are just like 30 rockets. You see the American bombers, you're like, haha, you press a button, all those rockets fly out of your nose. Yeah. What happens next? Your aircraft just disintegrates into two pieces. You're being pulled out by a chute violently, and then you're sort of sailing down with these two fuselage pieces next to you, and then you have to do it all again. Come on. B-17 was a great aircraft. Worst Luftwaffe aircraft to see service in World War II. I mean, the one I disagree with most is the Heinkel 162. The only thing that is sort of where I can say, okay, it is interesting in the aspect that they actually got it to work, but it's a horrible aircraft. And I am not even talking about some other projects that they had where they built one or two and everybody's like, oh, if they had more, they would have won the war. No, they wouldn't have. It's a good thing they didn't. All caps, I'm not reading that. Close air support in World War II from Allies seems underestimated by the Allies. Given the Typhoon's performance as a can opener on tanks in North Africa, why not focus over that on strategic bombings? You're probably referring to the Hurricane rather than Typhoon. It's probably like a typo there. So I looked at sort of the German reception to the Hurricane, to the Cannon Hurricane, and after a brief short amount of shock, which always happens when a new variable enters the battlefield, the Germans weren't all that impressed by the Hurricane, which is interesting because at the same time, they were sort of, the RAF was saying, oh, we're doing good work with this thing. And the Luftwaffe was saying the same thing with their cannon-armed aircraft then on the Eastern Front, specifically the Henschel 129 with the Mk101 at this point. But both sides greatly overestimated the effectiveness of cannon-armed weaponry. And here's a really funny thing, by the way. So I have the protocols of many of sort of the internal meetings that the Luftwaffe has. And I have specifically looked what has the Luftwaffe to say at the highest level about the Hurricanes armed with those 240 millimeter cannons. And it appears in the protocols in 3 different meetings, if I remember correctly. In the first meeting, they were like, oh yeah, something happened. We're not quite sure. We're going to check up on it. In the second one, they were like, oh yeah, so the Allies are now using the Era Cobra, the P-39, with a 39 millimeter cannon against tanks in North Africa, and they seem to have penetrated one Panzer III. And then in the next meeting, they're like, oh, by the way, it wasn't a P-39. It was apparently another aircraft that has gun pods under the wings firing a 40 millimeter round, because they checked the impact tone. They realized it's not a 39, but it's a 40 millimeter round, right? It's slightly bigger. And the takeaway from that is for the Luftwaffe, okay, well, but we were there first. We were there first. We actually had planes with the Mk101 doing this sort of missions first. Which is funny because if you look at the dates, that's not exactly true, but there's information and time lag. And that also shows you that actually it seems like the Hurricane bombers with those cannons weren't doing all that much impact, because if they were, this would have been a way bigger issue. So yeah, but I mean, the Germans had some limited anti-tank or anti-armored car busting in during the Spanish Civil War as well, and they didn't pay too much attention to that initially as well. So yeah. Right, picking up on the chat here again. It's a 37, but doesn't it fire HE only? Oh yeah, it's a 37 mil. Yeah. No, it could also fire AP. They had both on the Era Cobra. I think the Soviets were supplied with a limited number of AP, and obviously in sort of the ground strafer role, the Era Cobra was mainly equipped with HE. Yes, 37 millimeter. Apologies. Hurricanes could dish out a lot of damage and take it. You don't want to get hit in a Spitfire. Well, that's the interesting thing also with the Hurricane's construction, right? Because it's a composite construction out of different materials plus different techniques. So a lot of the Spitfire is metal covered all around. The Hurricane still has, especially in the back, still has just covering, right? It's sort of a skeleton. And yeah, that actually, ironically, while being sort of more basic, does improve its survivability in certain regards. Obviously, if you got a hit in the engine or the cooling section, I mean, it's a liquid-cooled engine. It's not going to run for long. Question, do I get recognized all the time? No. I got recognized like twice this year. And twice, that means twice in like 3 years, actually. I got recognized once by a student at university where I'm doing my PhD. And I got recognized once in a museum. Obviously, standing in front of an aircraft filming it. So, yeah. It's interesting when it happens, and I do try to make conversation with people, but it always surprises me. Well, what am I saying? It always surprises me. It happened twice now over the last 3 years, including COVID. How's my PhD going? Ask me something nicer, man. It's going. I'll get there, but it's just tough. It's tough. If you had to pick an aircraft to use during the First World War, what would you pick? I like the Spats. I really like the Spats. Or Newport. Newport 11, Newport 17, or a Spat. I think I would choose something from the Allied side. Yeah. I'm about to get your master's. Nice, well done, congratulations. No, seriously, I mean, pursue what you want to pursue. If you want to pursue an academic career with a PhD, do it. I'm happy I'm doing it, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But all good things are a lot of work. Have I seen or heard about the restoration of the Focke-Wulf 200 Condor? Yes, topical also to a video that's coming out. Hint, hint. You're starting to work on it? Well, good luck. Good luck to you. I hope you do really, really well. If you could learn to fly any aircraft ever existed, what would it be? Oh, what would it be? Oh, PBY Catalina. Why am I even thinking about this? PBY Catalina. Absolutely. Absolutely. How many paratroopers did the Ju-52 carry? 24? My mental brain, of course, my brain is now going to the C-47 because recently I looked at files in the National Archive where you can see how they arranged it depending on different loadouts with cargo plus paratroopers, OD paratroopers, and so on. So I'm over there right now mentally, and it's 24, right? But with the, just check it up. Is it 12? Is it 12 to 14? Could be, yeah. It's less than the, yeah. That's the cool thing, though. Going on with the C-47, you all know about the C-46 Commando, right? Obviously, a little bit of a tragic history there as well, but it had double the paratrooper carrying capability of a C-47. So when they used it for the last sort of big airborne operation during World War II, you can also see that in the Rhineland documentary made by Real Time History, where I contributed a bit, and I still hope to make a video on that specifically as well. There is actually, you can see the impact that doubling of the carrier capacity has, because they have, 40 C-46s, but that frees up like 80 C-47s to do towing for the gliders. I would have to check those numbers again, but it's just, and they have double tow gliders, of course. So it's 2 gliders per C-47 and 2 C-47s for 1 C-46. So essentially, you have 4 gliders for every C-46 you're adding to the formation, which is, just think about that, the carrying capacity that you're not just doubling it from 2 planes, to 1. You're expanding the force significantly. It's really, really cool. I don't know. I like that sort of stuff. I know it's not the sort of technical stuff that tends to do well on YouTube, but I really, really cool. I find that really, really cool. How likely do you think it is that there were multiple kills over China before the first official kill in North Korea? I don't know. I would have to look into that. You mean air kill, obviously, during the Korean War, right? I think actually, I mean, with the North Korean invasion of South Korea, there must have been some air kills there happening already. Although the South Korean Air Force was very, very small and very, very force-wise insignificant at the start of the campaign. What is the best plane manufacturer in your opinion? I'm gonna cut it off at World War II. So it's beginning of aviation to World War II. I'm not going to talk about Cold War or now. This is my opinion solely based on World War II. Probably Douglas. Probably Douglas. Definitely in the States. It's not Boeing. Grumman? No, Douglas. Not North American either. No. Although I really like North American's logo. It's really cool. Which decade is your favorite aviation age? That would be interwar period. So 18 to 39, let's say. Or let's say 35. I find that absolutely fascinating. But sadly, yeah. Vought? No, not Vought. Definitely not. Despite the similarities, what do you think was the better airplane, F-86 or the MiG-15? Oh, that's so even. That's so even. Don't look at the kill claims or the kill statistics over Korea, by the way. That's such a close-knitted give and take. I mean, I would probably fall on the side of the F-86. Simply because it's more sophisticated. I mean, it also depends which F-86. I want the ones with the air brakes. Yeah. I want the ones with the fixed compressibility issues. Although the firepower of those M3 Brownings, I mean, the fire rate is excellent, but the bullets don't do anything. I know, 50 cal. It's the holy grail of the US. I understand, but stopping power of one of those bullets is not just going to do it. Obviously, if you hit one of those bullets, because you have 3 of those in the center line, right? You're going to hit with way more than just one, but you really want to hit just bam and destroy the enemy aircraft. But then again, with the MiG-15, you have that slow rate of fire on the 37. Although if it hits, and you have a little bit faster firing 23 mil. But yeah, I think I'll fall on the F-86 side. Maybe that's just because I'm a Western boy. Right, I'm going to answer the last couple of questions now. F-86F versus MiG-15 BIS. Oh, you're making it even harder now, or very specific rather. I gave my answer to that. I think I gave my answer to that. But it's so close. It's so close. Was the Typhoon a can opener in North Africa? But I thought that was always used for the term can opener was always used for the Hurricanes. What are we talking about? Which year are we talking about? Which squadron are we talking about? By the way, if you're like responding to questions that I already answered for, I don't always see the response. Well, yes, the RAF has video evidence on tank kill claims on CAS. You know what? ORS, Operational Research Studies, right? Here. I mean, this is not on North Africa. I think the original question was on North Africa, right? But read this book, Ian Gooderson's Air Power at the Battlefront. And the Allies actually made a study about how many kill claims they had from their pilots, both American and RAF. And obviously kill claims that were confirmed based also on video evidence, and then how many were actually killed on the ground. They checked with the RECs, and there's barely any. I mean, where is the statistic? What do these... where is it? Where is it? Here we go. So, by the 9th Tactical Air Command, 2nd Tactical Air Force. Allied air claims for German armor destroyed in the Ardennes salient, right? There are 66 claims on tanks destroyed by, that would be mainly P-47s and Typhoons. 24 armored vehicles, so in total 90, right? And then attributable to air after they check the wrecks, 7. Get this book. That's by the way operational research study done at the time, literally after looking at the wrecks. Get this book. Especially nowadays with like video games and sort of these kill claims that we see, or this video footage we see online on it gives us the wrong impression. We see the same thing as the pilot. Like they shoot the rockets, there's big explosions. Obviously they're going to think they hit something. Why wouldn't you think you hit something? They're making these good claims in good faith. They're not cheating. But look at the sources then there. Okay. Last question. What is your favorite aviation book? I kind of covered like reading recommendations earlier, but my favorite aviation book, Inner Capitalist on. You can get the book Bernhard and I are currently writing. You can still get that, and it's going to be shipping out in February and March, and then it's also going to go into a general release. Cool, I just reset my chat. Fantastic. Isn't that great? I just reset my own chat, so now I don't see. Okay, it's back. Cool. Okay, that was not the last question. One more. RFS flying submarine. I don't know too much about it. Just a quick one. Rolls-Royce or Daimler-Benz? Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce, absolutely. Who thought about putting big cannons on planes was a good idea, and why? Okay. So again, ships, that's one side of the debate, right? I saw you wrote PBJ. It was, I think it had a 75 mil. That's one thing. Kind of makes sense, right? The reason why they put big caliber guns on these planes is they assumed they just wanted to up the one-hit kill potential. Like with a 30 mil, you need rate of fire to achieve those penetrations. You have rate of fire rather, and you can probably achieve penetrations in an ideal angle. But if you go above 50 or above, there is a very good chance that you're going to penetrate on the hit that you're making. And as you're doing that penetration, you're also going to be depending on where you hit, doing a lot of more damage than obviously with a 30 mil. Makes sense, right? Same thing with the 75 then, or the 88s and so on. And the reason why they thought it was a good idea, and I'm talking specifically about the Germans right now, where I've done a lot of research on this, is that side of the argument, so the effectiveness of the gun in itself, but also because they wanted to use it in very specific environments. They didn't want to use it on the front lines or as an interdictor, God forbid. Yeah, what they wanted to do is just attack tank formations that had broken through the German lines, where they don't have any air support, where they don't have any AA support. So in that environment, even though your plane is slow and sluggish, with that big gun pod that is under the center line, you don't really have to worry about the countermeasures from your enemy, and you can just take your time and theoretically, right? This is the theory they have in mind, that you can just theoretically snipe one tank after the other. Doesn't work out that way, of course. But that sort of gives you an idea of why they didn't really appreciate the problems with that concept in itself. Obviously, once they start testing these guns, they realize, oh God, there's an issue here. I mean, the Ju-88 that is being test flown in operational conditions with a 75 millimeter gun. I mean, I wish I could share these pictures. And the German National Archive has very restrictive sort of copyright law. So if I wanted to show you a single picture here, I would probably have to pay like 400 euros for it. So I cannot show you that picture. But if you go to the files, and I think I've referenced the files in previous videos already, in the German military archive, you can find the test results. You can find pictures that Luftwaffe took itself, and the plane that after having fired like 40 rounds or something out of that cannon mid-flight can no longer fly. It's a miracle that it came back. Like the windows on the cockpit have been like completely blown out by the blast of the gun. There was shearing in the fuselage. There is shearing in the centerline mounting pods, right? There's shearing in the wing. Some of the propellers have bursted from just the blast of the gun mid-flight. Imagine that. You're flying towards a tank, you're shooting, and suddenly one of your propellers just goes. Yeah. It's not what you want. It's not what you want. Okay, so I already said that this was my last question. Then I answered 4 more questions. So I think we are going to be rounding up now. Thank you very much for joining. 364 of you. Thank you very much indeed. I hope all of you enjoyed that. I want to do more streams like this soon. So I'm going to the archive again on Wednesday, and I thought making a quick stream there. It's probably too soon then because we're streaming today. But in the future, maybe also after an archive visit, I can stream a little bit more. But I want to do this more often. Let me know what you think about that, if you enjoy this format. If you're a Patreon and channel member, remember for next time, I'm going to collect more questions as well, and you can submit those, and I'm giving priority on that. So you can support the channel if you want via Patreon and channel memberships, or consider also, of course, getting the book. I think it's the first link in the description if you want that. That would be fantastic. So thank you very much for being here, all of you. Make sure you also check out the last couple of videos that have been published. I'm just going all out here with my advertisement. And yeah, I hope all of you... Military History Visualite is maybe streaming tomorrow some Steam Division 2. Man, Bernhard, we're really getting good with this advertising. Look at us. Yeah, who would have thought 2 years ago we were too afraid to even talk about our Patreon, like the Germans we are. I was like, oh no, we cannot do any self-advertisement. No, seriously, thank you guys all for being here. And yeah, have a good night, a good evening, a good afternoon, a good morning. And Sick Lid, thank you very much for that donation. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye, Sid. Sick, sorry. Sick Lid. Thank you much indeed. So all of you have a fantastic day. I'm going to round it up here, and have a good one. Bye-bye. Now, how do I end this? Oh, yeah.